I'm honored to be sort of the first person to take the stage at BeautyMatter. I'm from BeautyMatter at Next in Beauty. We had the honor of creating where we're commissioned by Beautyworld market research on the Middle East. And we called the report Past, Present, and Future, looking at the emerging opportunity in the region. So here's the ability to download it. It's about 84 pages. And it represents a deepening of the research arm of BeautyMatter. We worked closely with Messe Frankfurt Middle East, the organizers of Beautyworld, to look at the intersection, history, culture, and the economic dynamic to unpack why the Middle East is the hotbed of growth in the global beauty and wellness ecosystem. This is also represents a deepening of the research arm of BeautyMatter, and it demonstrates our commitment to intelligence and storytelling. This research and forecasting is also the culmination of a year of conversations and visits to the region. Last year was my first visit to Dubai, followed by a trip to Riyadh. So the perspective is really from an outsider, getting to understand the landscape and what makes it tick, to try and also share that with the global industry at large. So for most of us, especially those in the West, the Middle East is sometimes narrowly defined by the 6 countries of the GCC, but it can also be as expansive as the Middle East and North Africa, also referred to as MENA. And the fluidity in defining what constitutes the Middle East also is an important consideration when researching the market. So for many Westerners, it's sort of an amorphous area on the map somewhere between South and East Europe. Defining the market and getting sort of consistent data can be a little complex. The Middle East is sort of flexible in its geographic terms, and it shifts depending on the user and the era. There's also cross-cultural connections from North Africa through Western Asia and into Central Asia that have to be considered when looking at the full market. So when we dove into the market, it's really hard to get sort of consistent data. So you have to understand the data source and what they're constituting the Middle East to be. So very often you'll see a lot of disparate information, and you kind of have to connect the dots yourself. We tried to do a lot of that in storytelling, but it's complicated. So for this presentation, we're just going to focus on the GCC. I think the interesting thing about Middle Eastern beauty is it's one of the most lucrative beauty and wellness markets in the world. The region is intricate, it's fragmented, and you really sort of tapping into what the potential is requires understanding the nuances, even between the markets within the Middle East or within GCC. Some of the nuances are regulatory, others are religious, cultural, and even linguistic. So if we look at sort of the Middle East and North Africa, which is referred to as MENA, it's $60 billion, which is projected to be the value of the market by 2025. And why this is important is because the blueprint that has sort of guided international expansion in the last decade has evolved. And fueling growth requires looking beyond China. Sort of in the current state of the beauty industry, you see a lot of indie beauty brands launched in the North American market that have scaled to $100 million, $200 million, $300 million, and they're looking for expansion. 10 years ago, they would have gone to China first. Now China is not what it was. It's expensive, it's complicated, the growth isn't there. So these brands are now looking to other markets to get that growth outside of the US market or even Europe. If you look at what the top beauty and personal care markets are, this is according to Euromonitor. And before we dive into the GCC, I wanted to give you sort of the larger landscape. Dubai is the gatekeeper of beauty. The UAE is an accessible point of entry for global beauty brands due to the size and expat community and the English-speaking population. So even though it is sort of second in size in the market, it's usually the first point of entry country just for ease, for most people to see and test the market in a way that is sort of understandable to them. Although I will say that one of the things that I found most interesting last time I was in Dubai, that everyone was talking about Saudi Arabia and the opportunity of the Saudi Arabian beauty market and also wellness market. So let's dive into the GCC specifically. I don't think that you can really dive into what the opportunity is unless you understand sort of dynamics at play that are underpinning the market. So, the GCC is an economic powerhouse of regional growth drivers. The drivers are the gross domestic product. There's a tremendous amount of disposable wealth here. The population, which has doubled in size between 1995 and 2021, reaching a demographic milestone of 56 million. The UN World project growth to peak at 68 million in 2048. So there's still a lot of runway there in terms of population. One of the most interesting things is urbanization, which the GCC urbanization rate is 80% or higher, and anticipated to climb at 90% by 2050. So, what this means for us as a beauty industry is that this population that is growing rapidly is going to have more access to sort of what we purchase in an easier way. Another interesting sort of dynamic in the GCC is the focus on green growth. The GCC as a group and individual countries have ambitious targets for achieving renewable resources for electric generation and a more eco-conscious economic model that'll drive sustainable growth and opening up new sectors for job creation and innovation. What that means for beauty is the focus on sort of eco-conscious solutions and an eco-conscious economy and sustainability means that those things are going to become much more important for the products that they buy, including beauty. So combined, the GDP is close to $2 trillion. This gives you an idea. You don't have to take photos. I'm happy to make the presentation. So the GDP is an important indicator for emerging markets. So it gives you an understanding of sort of the economics at play. So another interesting factor is the demographics. One of the things is not only the population, but the percentage of expats in this community. So in the UAE, there's almost 88 to 90% expat. So the region, the GCC and the Middle East, sort of at large, is an incredibly diverse consumer base, which is something that needs to be taken into consideration. It's a huge opportunity when you actually dig in and understand who it is that you're selling to. And it is also important to know that, in the Middle East, we have this perception that it is only sort of very high-end luxury goods that the consumer base is looking for. And it's not necessarily true. There is a huge mass and masstige opportunity here, a huge premium opportunity here. So it is really sort of global in that perspective. Also, when I was talking about sort of the sustainability and the eco-conscious sort of forward-looking programs, it's important to understand that these are all supported by the government. So when you have the government sort of funding what the future is going to be, there's a more likelihood that it's going to happen. So you have Saudi Vision 2030 and the UAE Vision 2021. Every single country has an economic plan for what the mix of the country is going to look for, going to more renewable energy. This also is fueling sort of entrepreneurship, sort of opening up of society for women and the opportunities there. So this is all supported on a government level. Let's dig into beauty and personal care because that's why we're all here. So the beauty and personal care market in the GCC is expected to generate $9 billion in 2024 and projected to reach $11 billion by 2028 with a growth rate of just under 4%. From a market share, Saudi Arabia has the largest market share with the UAE following. And then you also have sort of it broken down. A lot of this is based on sort of the size geographically of the market, but they all have very, very healthy growth rates projected into the future. This also gives you a historic perspective of what the growth has been in the region, projected out to 2029, also according to Statista. This is, I think, when you look at this market, it's also important to understand what consumers are buying always, because there are a lot of opportunities. When you look at this, we all know that this market is a fragrance market. It over indexes into male purchasing in the category, which is not something you see in other countries. The average monthly spend on beauty for women is $333. The average for males is $215. And so you see how this is broken down. Given the growth of skincare sort of globally, it's a category that is really, really not tapped into yet, and creates a big opportunity, I think, for brands entering the market. It's a matter of figuring out how. The next thing I want to dive into is marketing, formulation, and marketing claims. Because to be successful in any market, you have to regionalize your offering. The real opportunity is going to be for those who not only view the Middle East as a critical market for selling their products and services, but also for those who engage in the region and support the visionaries and the innovative entrepreneurs that are co-creating the region's future. So, historically, this has been a birthplace where beauty rituals have been passed down through generations. There's a deep cultural relationship with fragrance. So, yes, it's a huge market, but understanding why and how fragrance ties into the culture of the region is also really important to unlocking the opportunity. Demographically, this is a very, very young region. It's tech savvy, they're globally connected, and they're open to experimentation. But Middle East isn't a monolith. Even in the GCC, there are different cultural, societal, and consumer considerations that need to be taken into account. So, when you are looking to regionalize your product offering, there are significant climate and environmental considerations that you need to take into account. So, I sort of broke this down into conditions, issues, and claims. We all know that there's high temperature, low humidity, prolonged exposure to air conditioning. All of these things create dehydrated and dry skin. There's hard water in the region with a really high mineral content. We have intense sun, UV exposure, and there's dust and sandstorms. The issues that it creates is dehydration and dryness, scalp and skin irritation, brittle hair color fading, product buildup, clogged pores, and perspiration. If you extend this one step further, there are an awful lot of sort of problem solutions claims that you can use to sort of regionalize your products in a way that is sort of meaningful to what's happening to the consumers in this region. So, the state of play, international to local, when you come into this market, you have to think, and I would say not only this market, any market, because any market in the world is sort of globally connected. So come into the market, think like a global brand, think like a global player, or behave like a global player, but act like a local brand. Consumers seek brands that provide value to them, use local resources, preserve indigenous traditions, and support local economies. For example, 79% of Saudi Arabian consumers agree that heritage is an important part of their identity. There are a lot of corollaries between what we saw happen in the Chinese market and what we're seeing happening as the Middle East sort of matures as a market. So this young consumer is globally connected. They know what's going on. They are tastemakers, and they're very, very, very proud of their culture and where they're from. So you need to sort of recognize that, speak to it, and understand it in order to be able to market to them. For instance, understanding that this is such a large fragrance market, um, that is an entry point for products like if you're in body care or if you're in skincare, understanding the olfactive nature of products is a way to connect to this consumer. So, regional considerations. We spoke about it before, diversity and inclusion, modesty and conservatism. So, this is a very conservative and modest culture. It's opening up, but you still need to respect it. And country to country is very different. Understanding what those nuances are is really important, which is why it's important to have a really good local partner to help you navigate that. It goes to your marketing claim, the marketing images, and also sort of how you show up at retail. Religious sensitivities ties into that. This is also a market where natural and organic and clean beauty is just emerging. In the West, we've sort of clean has become table stakes. It's sort of a nascent concept here. There are a lot of indie retail players that are sort of educating and filling that space. But natural and organic and clean are really trends to lean into. Local ingredients and traditions, also understanding family dynamics and gender roles in this region is also important. It ties back to sort of understanding the cultural relevance and being respectful of how you show up. Sustainability is important now, and it's going to become increasingly important as the government places more and more importance on it. I think we're going to end up seeing a real focus on packaging and recycling. And when the government dictates it, it happens. The beauty industry is not so good at policing itself in that respect. And the sensorial experience. So, this is a country that is all about fragrance and understanding that regardless of what category you're in. So this is some interesting research done by the Chalhoub Group. So Chalhoub owns Faces, which is a prestige retailer in the region. They also have the JV for Sephora. So they are very tapped into what's happening in the market and what's selling. You'll see that supermarkets, beauty stores, and pharmacies are where a lot of people purchase. Prestige skincare is just emerging, and we'll sort of dive into that a little bit. But you'll see here that mass market is where most products are being purchased, followed by masstige and prestige. So let me dive into some macro trends. These are sort of super high level. The report is almost 90 pages long, so you're really just getting a little bit of taste, but we will go through them quickly. So, the economic landscape. Spoke about it sort of setting up on where the growth is, but the GCC is home to some of the world's fastest growing economies. It's an ideal environment for international businesses, investors, and expats looking for new challenges. It is also sort of fertile ground for regional entrepreneurs. So we've already seen some beauty brands, Huda, Amouage, already play on an international scale. But there are emerging beauty brands, Gastiri, which is a Saudi brand that I think are really indicative of what we're going to see coming out of this region. And I think in many ways, the way we saw C beauty brands kind of rise up as the Chinese market grew and more international focus was on it. I think we're going to see the same thing with A beauty brands, and I think Asteri, because she's young and sort of it is very much a brand of the place and what's happening right now, I think is one to watch and to see how these entrepreneurs are approaching the category. So anytime you talk about the Middle East, is sort of how young the population is, kind of goes hand in hand with the conversation. Gen Z is sort of redefining the age. They are social pioneers, they're cultural tastemakers, and they're also maturing into a powerful economic force. And it's not only happening here, it's happening around the world. But if you take into consideration that 63% of the Saudi population is under the age of 30, the potential for what Gen Z and how they're going to shape what this region is cannot be underestimated. The average age of entrepreneurs in the Middle East is 26 years old. So the entrepreneurial startups happening in this country are going to be very sort of Gen Z focused. They're going to be very steeped in sort of the cultural nuances and the heritage, and also sort of wrapped in technology and an innate sort of digital native approach. When you want to speak to this audience, it's sort of multifaceted. You have to adapt to the nuance of the regions. You also have to adapt to the fact that there is tremendous sort of a digital penetration. So it's a mobile first market. And consumers are supporting and recognizing a deep connection to homegrown brands, but they also love international brands. They are connected on a global scale. So when you're launching here, they're probably already aware of the brand. So globally connected, but very sort of regionally focused as well. The other thing that is very, I think, for the region is the empowerment of females and entrepreneurship. So, beauty in this region was once sort of a very private affair, shared primarily among women, but it's now evolved into a symbol, and it's sort of it's shifting social and cultural norms. Beauty today serves as a platform for women to assert their identities, to express themselves, and to express themselves openly in public network or in public spheres. Arab women are also sort of part of the digital world, and their online expression is equally as important to the real life community. 71% of all women in the region are participating in sort of social networking of some kind. So that's pretty deep penetration from a digital perspective. This wave of empowerment that's sort of sweeping the region is creating ambitious, courageous, and creative female minds that are pushing for new opportunities and increased freedom. And it's really creating a strong, empowered vision of Middle Eastern womanhood. When you empower women, it flows through to the economy. So, increased female participation in the workforce could boost this economy by $2.7 trillion by 2025, according to the World Economic Forum. 70% of university graduates in the UAE are women. I wanted to put this quote in because I think it's also important to understand that there's all different kinds of feminism. So, this is a quote from the co editor of the Arabs Women's Activism and Sociopolitical Transformation Unfinished Gender Revolutions. We should try to always create our own homemade recipe of multiple feminisms. We should be contextualized within our own cultures, social, political, and socioeconomic realities, which, of course, are different not just between the West and East or the Western world and the Arab world, but even within and across the Arab countries. I think this is such an important nuance to not only understand, but respect when it comes to doing business in this region as women sort of grow into what the opening of the society means. So, digging into sort of digitally connected, 90% of the purchases in the UAE and Saudi Arabia are influenced by online content. Smartphone penetration in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is at 97%. So that means almost everyone in Saudi has a smartphone, which is mind-boggling when you think about it. And e-commerce in the sector or in the Middle East is projected to reach $50 billion by 2025. So digital transformation is another thing to pay attention to. The rise of e-commerce and social media has made beauty products more accessible to a wider audience. So if you think about the sort of how large geographically the Middle East is, very often when we think of the Middle East, we think of mega malls and we think of department stores, but they're really only in sort of the top cities. So the fact that there is this e-commerce penetration makes products more accessible to the general population. So if you look at over the past decade how the Middle East has transitioned from a retail market relying on brick and mortar stores to one more of purchasing at a click of the button, it's grown exponentially and increased and projected to do so into the near future. That's not to say that brick and mortar retail is not important. It is. This is an interesting slide because it shows the evolution of countries sort of moves from different phases of e-commerce. So jumping from one phase in development to the next, the UAE has sort of not looked back, and Saudi Arabia is sort of following right after them. The internet penetration is happening at larger rates, so sort of and the sales follow. We'll also see sort of other countries in the GCC following, but the UAE is leading that charge. So if we look at the retail dynamics, because e-commerce is important, but this is still a brick and mortar environment as well, because going to the mall and shopping in a brick and mortar store is also a way of socializing. The challenge is you have offline retail, so you have prestige retailers like Sephora and Faces. You have department stores like Harvey Nichols and Bloomingdale's, but they're sort of very limited, so hard to get scale there. You have pharmacies, then you have e-commerce. So you have sort of regionally born heroes, if you will. You have cross-border competition, so the likes of Cult Beauty and Nika, and then you have marketplaces. This is also a market where, especially for skincare, the distribution is happening in spas, salons, and clinics. So, to really sort of penetrate the market, it's important to sort of take those into context as well. And then you have D2C. So, this also speaks more to not only the e commerce, but sort of branded stores. I think one of the opportunities that we're seeing happening is prestige retail and omni-channel retail sort of filling the space. So you have Faces, which is owned by Chalhoub, which has 70 points of distribution. You have Sephora, which has about 85 doors. You also have Gold Apple, which launched in Doha last year. It is a Russian omni-channel prestige retail concept. You have Nysa, which is Nika's new UAE arm that just launched in March, I believe, and it's their first stab at international distribution. And Watson's, Asia's largest health and beauty retailer, is set to launch in two more GCC markets after recording record sales growth of 53% in the region last year. The company has 18 stores in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, and it's targeting expansion into Bahrain and Kuwait this year, with Oman following. So I think we're going to see growth in prestige retail and omni-channel retail that is going to create opportunities for a lot of sort of prestige and masstige beauty brands. I think one of the drivers that has really made a change in this market has been Sephora's doubling down on the market, if you will. So they opened the first store in the region in 2007, and it's grown exponentially with a joint venture with the Chalhoub Group. They have 85 stores in 5 markets. The flagship store is in the Dubai Mall and ranks as the #1 store worldwide. So why this is so important is because Sephora has offered a fast track for some of the hottest brands in the beauty world to enter the market pretty fast. So a lot of the brands that are the it brands in North America have made a big splash here, and they've been able to do it because they have the help of Sephora to navigate the cultural nuances, the regulatory nuances, and also it gives them immediate penetration. Another thing that Sephora also provides them is a lot of these brands are focused in North America for the most part. They sort of build there and then look to expand. Sephora also provides them regionalization. So most of them are operating sort of global social channels, and they regionalize their content through the Sephora channels. So Sephora has really been a very important conduit for a lot of emerging brands to penetrate this market. So I want to dive into sustainability just for a moment, because I think it is going to be a huge driver for the market, but I also think the market is going to lead and show some other markets how things can be done in a more sustainable way. So the charge here is really to go from an oil-rich past to a renewable future. And why that's important is because the region The region is feeling sort of climate change in a way that is very, very tangible. So it's warming at twice the global average and projected to be to up climate is expected to increase by 4 degrees Celsius by 2050. So countries in the region have begun integrating climate commitments to their strategic planning. I think you're seeing this in projects across the region. Saudi Arabia's NEOM project has some of the most mind blowing innovation happening. There's also a lot of work happening sort of in wellness and longevity, also tied to sustainability. And if we look to this green revolution, the byproduct of this is going to be sort of a rise of conscious consumers. So, as the sustainability journey of the Middle East continues, it's more than just a global trend. It is sort of a strategic reorientation, economic compass for this region. And the consumers are going to follow suit, looking for more eco friendly products, sustainable packaging. And this has really given rise to sort of the mainstreaming of clean beauty, which has been sort of a trend in Western markets. It's also given rise to an interest in K beauty and so much room to grow when it comes to sort of the concept of clean. If you look at some of this was a study done by Euromonitor. If you look, the UAE and Saudi Arabia eventually over index in sustainability, but they are right up there with sort of global perceptions on sort of reducing energy consumption, using less water, more sustainable packaging, and to buy sustainable products. So this is going to be an underpinning of beauty in the region. With that, I just want to say that it has been so amazing to be able to dive into this region and look at sort of the demographics, the demographic shift, the opportunities in the region. I think it's so dynamic and it really reflects this blending of tradition and culture and global innovation that is going to be sort of a place where the world is looking and the beauty industry is definitely looking. I think another interesting sort of thing that is happening is the Western beauty standard, which has sort of been an ideal definition, is really being replaced by a more Arabic beauty ideal instead, which is, I think, really amazing. And it shows sort of how committed and what the opportunity is here if you really understand the dynamics of sort of the culture and the people here. I hope you download the report. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And we have a couple minutes for questions if you have any.
Yes, we do have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience, and we have microphones roaming around. Does anyone have a question for Kelly? Yes. Can I have a microphone here, please, at the front?
Good morning. Thank you for all your insights. I would like to focus a little bit more on sustainability and green, clean beauty. And I would like to ask you, in your experience, you told us that it's an emerging market and the people and the consumers somehow they will follow. What would it take for small businesses to do in order to be out there? Because I wonder, will all the big brands have all these clean beauty products? Will they turn the industry there? And how quick would that be? Because I own 100% natural product for exfoliation, and I find it quite difficult to penetrate. Of course, it needs much education to the audience. So I'd love your insight on this, please.
Yeah, so I think that there are a number of mostly online clean beauty entrepreneurs. One of them is Anisha Oberoi from Secret Skin that they have really sort of been educating the market for you. Where I would start as a small brand is obviously tap influencers that are operating sort of in the clean space to get the narrative sort of started, and then focus on those clean beauty leaders that are also entrepreneurs and mostly online, and build a base that way. But yes, sort of all of the large clean beauty brands are going to see this market as an opportunity as well. But I think you have a head start. You're here, you're listening, you're asking the question. And if you look in the report, there is a list of probably 20 retailers and independent retailers, and a lot of them are focused on clean beauty.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.